Welcome to Redressing History, a podcast. This series seeks to foreground the work of African diaspora researchers whose work in histories are currently underrepresented and often overlooked within publications, academia, museums, and the media. This podcast was sponsored by the University of Brighton's Centre for Design History and the University's Equality and Inclusion Fund. My name is Elli Michaela Young, and today I will be speaking to Miriam Hinds-Smith about her experiences as an African diaspora researcher, fashion and textiles, underrepresented histories, and the challenges of archival research for African diaspora researchers. Miriam is a mother, wife, artist, and educator who is committed to the development of aspiring artists and entrepreneurs. As Dean of the School of Visual Arts at Edna Manley College of Visual and Performing Arts, she is driven to create collaborative opportunities for students across all sectors. As well as attending universities in the UK and France, Miriam is also an honours graduate of the Edna Manley College of Visual and Performing Arts and a trained educator from the University of Technology in Jamaica. As a Christian, her work is emotive yet nuanced and seeks to confront narratives of cultural identity, colonialism, and issues of violence against women and children. Thank you, Miriam, and welcome.
Thank you, Ella. Thank you for having me.
I would like to start by finding out a little bit more about your research and practice.
Okay, so I work from various angles in terms of my investigation, my work. I take perspectives from the applied arts, and I work also as a fine artist. So there are points where there's a marriage of the two to push whatever it is I'm trying to dissect, whatever I'm trying to understand, whatever I'm trying to investigate. So I start from a very pure perspective as it pertains to textiles. I think fundamentally that's where fashion starts. And so in understanding textiles, in understanding their genesis, in understanding their origin, and in understanding their move across spaces and how they have been used and adopted and appropriated, I get a better sense of what it is that I want to talk about in my work. Okay. And sometimes I take it down to the mere fiber itself and to create that conversation. So I look outside, I look within, I look at what it is, particularly within our space, Jamaica, which from I remember when I started as my specialization in textiles and fiber arts, it has always been quite an annoyance of mine that as a nation, young as we are, very young, we just celebrated our independence, emancipation last week. We still, in terms of a cloth, we really don't have an identity. And that is something that I have always looked at and something I've always spoken about in relation to what it is when we celebrate, we shroud, we dress ourselves and we acclaim as our national cloth, which really isn't. And that for me is something that I find is a constant dialogue and something that we need to address.
That sort of starts this idea, because I wanted to ask you next why you got interested in fashion and textiles. There's a clear lack of that connection in Jamaica, I suppose, that makes you more interested.
Well, the thing about it is, what I've found is that we tend to go at things in a lot of fits and starts, wherein as it pertains to honing and creating that body that identifies, what are the signifiers of Jamaica. Yeah, we have a motto that says out of many, one people, and that's fantastic. But at the same time, what is it that we have as a signifiers that embraces everyone and that we're comfortable with, even to take from a design sense and to also look at our multi-heritage population to say, okay, then using that motto out of many, how do we identify through our fashion what this means? and I look at other spaces similar in size to us, I look at the Philippines. Theirs is the pineapple fiber. There's nowhere else in the world that manufactures as beautiful pineapple fiber as they do. Their history of coming to being may be somewhat different. But the fact is, as a nation, you find that other island nations tend to have what is a signifier of who they are. What we have within the Caribbean diaspora is something quite different, where we have assigned fabrics that we then, at our points of identifying ourselves as Caribbean people, that's what we go to. But we've not spent the time to really address and redress these issues that have been passed on, and we've just gone with the flow, which is something I find a little bit disturbing, considering how rich our history is. And I say a little bit disturbing, I'm just being mild there. How rich our history is, and how much we do when we create, look at the things that we have as our island signifiers, that we really have not come to terms in utilizing those as effectively in fashion.
Okay. Because we've been thinking about the histories of these fashions, because me as a researcher, I've always found problems about trying to find this information that I need in the archives, because most of the time it isn't there. And when you were just talking about with Jamaica's rich history and the fact that there isn't something there that you can say, this is us and this is how we define ourselves, or this is what makes this textile Jamaican. Do you think that can be found in Jamaica's history? Do you think there was something there at one point and it's just disappeared? Or
I think from several angles, I think it is. I think there is actually. I believe if we look at the issue, for example, understanding that Jamaica constitutes 80% Afro descent population. One of the things I came across when I started getting really engrossed in textiles and origin was the fact that, and it's very faintly mentioned, and I say faintly because I think it read about 2 or 3 lines. A lot of the plantations that we had in Portland, etc., we grew indigo here. Indigo, that is an ancestral approach to fabric dyeing and fabric coloration that was later exploited and saw as a means of income generation for our colonial overlords. It was the slaves that tended these fields. It was the slaves that did the dyeing, or the enslaved rather, that did the dyeing, that did all the, because this was part of their cultural retention coming over, right? And so the part that really gets to me is that now is a time that is ripe to have a rebirth of this kind of investigation. And there are a few of us who are pushing the envelope in this regard. So that in and of itself, creating that connection, going back to those spaces, going back to those techniques. One of the things I want to interject too is that what frustrates me is that as a people, we tend to not look at history the same way others look at it, as something they can benefit from. So we need to say, how can I benefit from my history? If others have exploited it, why can't I use it to move me forward, i.e. my space, my country, my identity? So then let's take the arm of entrepreneurship. Yes, we're an agrarian society in a lot of spaces. And I do believe that if we are mindful, if we really look at these things, we can then turn the tides in terms of what it would take to have, say, niche industries that deal and address these things. Look at the designs that came out of our folklore. One of the things that a lot of people don't realize is that the idea of making and creating, stitching, fashioning was a part of the plantation experience for a number of slaves at the time, enslaved. And so the fact that these are skills that are passed down from generation to generation, embroidering what are our oral traditions, our folk tales, our Jamaican sceneries. Those are things that are very unique and specific to this space. And what I really find that enrages me a little bit is that we don't hold them in the regard that we should, because that's what sets us apart. That's what makes us distinct. Those are the things that brings about that difference. It says there is a careful attention to who we are as a people, reflected in our fabric, reflected in the stories that we tell, that we adorn ourselves with. And we must be mindful that, fashion, whatever we wear, I tend to wear a lot of neutral, just plain colors, because I'm very mindful of what I wear in terms of patterns on fabric, the significance they carry, and what they would mean to me in my space. And so for me, it's important that these narratives, these clothes that we wear, our second skin, must echo something about who we are. Right now, we have a high influx and we are heavily influenced by everything North American. If we see it often enough, it's going to be a part of our system, our pop culture. It is really unfortunate. But one of the things I do believe that our older generation and even younger folks like myself, very young folks like myself, have a charge to ensure that these things don't just fade away over time, that these things are not just spoken of in a moment, but there is a concerted effort to create a direction, make an effort, have some attention paid to holding on and retaining our cultural signifiers through fabric that identifies us and sets us apart.
So I've been looking at the Jamaican Fashion Guild, and in the archives in Jamaica, I couldn't find anything, but I came across some information in Canada, in an archive in Canada. So researchers that came to Jamaica and all the materials that have been documented and preserved have been because of the interest from external researchers. So those are the ones that have been interested in the history of slavery and those types of stories. But no one's been interested in really Jamaican design and the contributions Jamaican has made to design. So it ends up being what's made in Jamaica and what's your history is then taken out. Because I've purchased clothes made by the Jamaican Fashion Guild, not in Jamaica, but in America and in Canada. And then somebody else I've been speaking to, she said she recently saw some in Australia, and they are not cheap either. They sell them quite expensive because they're on vintage sites. So I think for me, there's so much lost in Jamaican archives because of that.
And I think we need to be very mindful in terms of our documentation. We're a very oral tradition, space that lives in oral tradition and oral history. But we really need to start documenting assiduously what has been the trajectory and development of our fashion to date. Because names such as Norma Soas, Annie Lopez, Barry Moncrief, we're going to be not hearing about them in the very near future if we don't look at the significance of documenting these individuals who've really set a very good foundation for us. That informs a particular aesthetic. That also, in as much as there's some Western appropriation, but there is still that freshness that says this is Caribbean, this is Jamaica. And the only thing to me that would make it significantly different is if, too, the fabric. Well, in the instance of Norma Soas, she heavily at one point invested in graduates of the Edna Manley College to create designs that she would then fashion. And these were fantastic, really beautiful, working on surfaces such as linens, etc. But that needs to develop a continuum. There has to be a continuum. That's the only way anything is built. If we look at every and all of these spaces in Paris, in the States, in England, there is a continuum. Laura Ashley didn't just happen overnight.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah?
Exactly.
And so Waverly, those are things that they start and they push. Yes, it is hard for us if we're going to be importing a lot of our raw materials, but the fact is, if you break it down in bite-sized pieces, the pie would be so much larger. The whole tapestry together would be so much larger in terms of the various facets of what constitutes textiles and design in Jamaica. All the influences, older things. We don't even recognize and reference our Taino heritage in any of what we produce. And from what has been called, from even spaces we can still visit, why then are we not making these into tangibles? So there are lots of markers along our road, our trajectory, that should be pulled into what signifies an island space and island design, because then we also have to look at how we can make these things sustainable.
Yeah, definitely.
A lot of the craft work that were done in the past, repurposing old garments to make rugs, etc., to make beautiful interior pieces, those are still part of the pool that we need to expand on. You'll find there are a handful of people that practice some of these techniques, but then we need to look at it and make it into something really sophisticated and retain that kind of heritage, that practice. So if we look at it and you map it, there's so many avenues and aspects that we can expand on that will still echo a strong retention of our various cultures, but significant to Jamaica as a space.
No, I completely agree with you. For me, at this stage, I guess it's just a matter of we need to start figuring out what that history is, where that information is, and start bringing it all together so that people have got this place to go to and to say, this is historically what we did in Jamaica, and this is us as Jamaicans. Because I know Aragonabo had an independence textile that they printed every year, and I've seen it on photographs. But
and I still actually have in my archives, I call it my archives, a number of the prints that came out of Aragonaba, Inks and Paints, Jamaica at the time. And Ruth Clarage at the time that really did fantastic fashion textiles, interior textiles. And I do believe that this is something that we need to pay more serious attention to.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
Really map how the creative sector intersects with the agricultural sector, intersects with science and technology, for us to then really appreciate and move forward with this sector.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you, because I think it needs to be done pretty soon.
It's got to be done.
Yeah, before these people disappear. And then all that information is lost.
It's just gone.
Because I know I've spoken to Winston Stoner, and I remember...
Yes.
And I remember him telling me that he'd taken over Ruth Claridge's business.
Yes,
so somewhere there are screens with her designs on it. Have you got
I ended up having quite a few of those screens.
Thank goodness.
I ended up having quite a few of those screens, and I think they're some of the most precious designs that and the images too, because I do believe these are things we need to revisit. And these are things we need to push, and these are things that have a place now, and these are things that will take us further ahead and give us an identity and a footing as a fashion textile design space.
You see, that's a whole funded project.
It is, because one of the things that while at Winchester, I had the wonderful opportunity of proving my theory at the time. I thought that as an island nation, we needed to be a little bit more eco-conscious, a little bit more ecologically conscious if we were to take that next step. And what would it then mean? And so I was able to work and prove my theory working in the Netherlands, in Holland, Boxmeer, with Stork Enterprise, to reproduce beautiful fabric design with technology. Technology as a printer, I was able to print in like one step, but then the authenticity of the design still came from my Jamaican space. So technology can take us into these niche spaces. And I don't see why these are things that we're not exploring. Jamaica could be the hub of the Caribbean for digital printing on fabric. Why not? We have individuals who we can, you pull from the archives, you create your design pool, you do your limited runs, you print and export. These are things that we should look at, and these are collaborations that can happen across spaces. I don't see why not. I think this is an opportunity that we need to explore, and explore it in a way that is planned, that is properly managed and maintained, and look at how we can actually, in the same way you would probably send to China or Miami to print, why not Jamaica? As a plus size, we're also feeding and developing our own space, wearing what we create, and have those within our spaces, within our hotels, within our
exactly.
Gift shops or boutiques, etc. So
you've got so many Jamaican celebrities that you could get to wear your designs.
Exactly. And I don't see why we should not invest in this kind of historical retention that is going to move us forward using available technology, because we've got tons of spaces that could facilitate something like this. My brain is always thinking of how you connect the dots. There's so many ways in which it can work. So it is really to start rattling the cages and making enough noise that somebody's going to pay attention. But it's something that I do believe we've got to do, and we've got to do it soon.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And it's about, a lot of the times this thing is about, it does come down to the money, having the money to do it. Because, even with research, I've been to Jamaica, found certain things, but then I had to go to Canada to find other things. And so as a researcher, that's a lot of money to unpack all these things. So I can understand how you're now wanting to establish Jamaica as a textile printing capital of the Caribbean.
Yes,
that's going to be a lot of money.
Absolutely. That's been my dream forever.
Well, considering that your government years ago wanted to be the fashion capital of the Caribbean, why can't you be the textile design capital of the Caribbean?
Absolutely.
What do we need to do to safeguard these histories? But you've already told me.
We've got to document, and we've got to do the research. We've got to do the compilation. We've got to create the database. We've got to educate. Education. It's gonna sit there. It's gonna reside in a space of education to make this. It's got to be a part of our mandate. Exactly. If we talk about the creative sector and we're not talking about textiles, sustainability, art and fashion and design, then we're missing a big part of it. Because that is a big part of it. When a fashion designer goes to get a bit of fabric, they're looking at, what does this fabric come with? What's the language of this fabric? What is it saying? How does it speak to me? How does it evoke the essence of what it is I want to show? So therefore, let me go to a space of origin. Then yes, you can have somebody that does a beautiful knockoff of something that's Jamaican design. But at the same time, if you go to the space of origin, you're going to get the best of what there is. Yeah, definitely. Because it's coming from an authentic space. So for me, there's always a space to originate. There always is a space to originate. And the best space to look is in your history. It's in who you are as a people. It's in all these components that makes us who we are at this point in time.
Well, that is just a beautiful way to end. So thank you very much, Miriam.
Thank you for having me. You've got me very excited, getting on.
Well, keep getting excited, because at the end of this series, we're going to have a panel where I'm going to bring all my speakers together, and that is going to just get you even more excited about the future.
Looking forward to all of that. Thank you so much for having me, Ellie.
Next week, we're going to be talking to Talika Kirkland. Talika is a fashion historian and lecturer in cultural and historical studies at the London College of Fashion and a PhD candidate at Goldsmiths University.